in order to try and let as many of you ask questions as possible, and we'll try to keep that on both sides to a reasonable amount. I'm going to ask you, as a courtesy, not to fire too many questions on health to Alec, because he is here to speak for the, is it the north side or the yes? One of the sides anyway, so we'll keep it to that. Let me simply introduce them, and speaking for the No campaign, on my right is Dave Dempsey. He's a Conservative councillor for Inverkeithing and Dalgety Bay and leader of the 5 Conservatives. He graduated from the University of Edinburgh with a degree in pure mathematics, worked in Africa for a number of years. He now teaches maths part-time, along with his role as councillor and chairman of the South 5 Conservative Association. After some 5 years of trying to re-establish the Conservatives in Fife, he's standing again in the Conservative ward for Inverkeithing and Dalgety Bay. In his spare time, he enjoys working with computers and listening to classic music. And he says as loud as possible, I'm not even sure what classic music is, but I'm sure he does. Maybe for a few of the cynics amongst us, we might find at least that answer tonight. Professor Adam Thomkins is Professor in Glasgow. He's a British legal scholar. He has the John Miller Chair in Glasgow. He was educated at the University of East Anglia and the London School of Economics. He taught in the School of Law of King's College in London between 1991 and 2000 and became a Fellow at St Catherine's College, Oxford in the year 2000, before being elected to the chair in Glasgow. His research interests lie in constitutional theory and history, British EU and comparative constitutional law, and republicanism. Professor Thomkins has published 7 books in these areas. He's a member of the group Republic, a British Republican organisation advocating the replacement of the monarchy with a democratically elected head of state, and has published a Republican Constitution. Professor Thomkins has held visiting appointments at various universities in both Canada and Australia and has lectured throughout the world. In April 2009, he became associated with Ampersand, a stable at the Faculty of Advocates, as part of its Ampersand academics link between practitioners and academics. In the summer of 2009, he was appointed legal advisor to the House of Lords Constitution Committee. But he also has a human side, not to mention flaws, because he admits that he's a supporter of Arsenal Football Club. And in his spare time, he has a wife and 4 children. So he's kept pretty busy. For the Yes campaign, we have Alec Neil. He was currently a member of the Scottish Parliament for Adrian Shotts, Cabinet Secretary for Health and Wellbeing in the Scottish Government. He's been an MSP since 1999, hails from Patna in Ayrshire, and he began political life as a member of the Labour Party. He joined that party at the age of 16, became head of their student wing while studying economics at Dundee University. Upon graduation, he became the Labour Party's Scottish researcher until in 1976 he left Labour to help form the Scottish Labour Party. I think that's right, that's what it said anyway. After the 79 general election, he worked in America before returning to Scotland, forming his own economic consultancy business. In 85, he saw the light, as he sees it, and he joined the SNP and stood as their candidate in the 89 Glasgow Central by-election, rising to senior office within the party. After election to the Scottish Parliament in 1999, he became spokesperson for social justice before chairing the Parliament's Enterprise and Lifelong Learning Committee from 2000 to 2003, and then again 2004 till 2007. From 2007, he was Vice Convener of the European and External Relations Committee and member of the Finance Committee. He was also co-convener of the cross-party group on the Scottish economy and is on the Council of Europe's Local and Regional Authorities Association. In February 2009, he was appointed Scottish Government Minister for Housing and Communities, and after the 2011 elections, he was promoted to the Cabinet as Infrastructure and Capital Investment Secretary before moving to the Health portfolio in September 2012. A lifelong interest in politics that has to be admired wherever you might stand politically. And Robin McAlpine, we all studied the late Robin McAlpine because he arrived just in time not to be on the substitute bench, but he graduated from Glasgow University to work as a journalist. He then moved to London to become press officer to George Robertson, then Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland and leader of the Scottish Labour Party. He returned to Scotland to work in policy development, was employed as Public Affairs Manager for University Scotland for a number of years, and then after that he became editor of the Scottish Left Review, Scotland's leading left of centre political magazine. In 2004, he set up the Scottish Left Review Press, a publishing arm of the Scottish Left Review. His fifth book will be published this year. He's currently director of the Jimmy Reid Foundation, editor of the Scottish Left Review, and a well-known author for that side of the argument. He's been crisscrossing the Central Belt, seeking to build grassroots support for Common Weal, a discussion paper outlining a possible model for economic and social development in Scotland amongst SNP supporters. Speaking at Yes Scotland meetings and local party associations, he insists that the rank and file members love it, and to share the extent to which that might be true, I can tell you that he was even made a marriage offer when he spoke at the local SNP group in West Calder. I have no idea if he took it up.
Mrs. would he be happy?
He says his missus wouldn't be happy. Maybe she would. The members of our panel have all one thing in common, and that is a passion for the genuinely held beliefs on what is best for Scotland. Tonight, I have no doubt that they will share that passion, but I am absolutely sure that I'll be able to rely on all of them to do it with courtesy and good humour, and even, God willing, a degree of brevity. I'm a minister, and I still believe in miracles. However, since like some of you, I'm an undecided voter, the miracle I would really like to see tonight is 4 folk who are involved actively in politics answering the questions they're asked. I'm going to allow the No campaign to kick off, and I'm going to invite Dave Dempsey to speak to you now.
I didn't realise I was going to be first. Can you hear me all okay? Is that any better? No. Is this mic actually working? That helps, can it? Try that, Dave. Is it working now? Yes. Oh, good. Later. I feel like I'm sitting in front of a very eccentric ice cream. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. When I've been out knocking doors, which we've been doing a fair bit of it recently, I've found you can divide the population into 4 groups, and I suspect at least 3 of those are represented here this evening. To those of you who are minded to vote no, I just say I hope I don't disappoint you this evening. To those of you who are minded to vote yes, I'm going to pose a question. What will you be able to do in an independent Scotland that you can't do now? And where I've asked this, I've really only had 2 answers so far. One was a technical one about childcare, which I would argue that you don't actually need to be an independent country to improve childcare. And the other one, which has appeared more than once, is I'll be able to vote for the government of an independent Scotland, which is clearly true, but I don't think really sort of answers any great question. The third group I've found, are people who are just totally bamboozled by the whole thing. There's not that many of them, and I suspect they're not well represented here this evening. And the fourth and most interesting group are those who are undecided but looking to make up their minds. And I'm going to just basically concentrate on a couple of points this evening. In this bit anyway, we'll be sure we'll get plenty of other things as we go along. One is a question that was posed on the TV debate and not, I feel, particularly well dealt with. And the question that was posed was, could an independent Scotland be a successful country? And what that hinges on, I think, is the word could. Because I could go home this evening, buy a lottery ticket, and I could win the jackpot. I could toss this coin 10 times, and I could get 10 heads. And yes, an independent Scotland could be a successful country. Now, the odds against the jackpot are astronomical. The odds against the coin tossing are 1,023 to 1, the advantage of doing a maths degree. And the odds on an independent Scotland being a successful country are something that you, the undecided voters, have to make a judgment on not later than September the 18th. And we hear the call, we need more facts, we need more facts. And ideally we do need more facts. But the truth of the matter is that no one knows how an independent Scotland will turn out. And nobody knows, for that matter, how Scotland will turn out if the answer is a no vote. Because as somebody much cleverer than me once said, prediction is difficult, and predicting the future is particularly difficult. Now, we had presented to us in November last year a very large document, I think entitled Scotland's Future, which said, or presented, a vision of what an independent Scotland would be like. Now, we know, I believe, that that vision is not precisely 100% accurate, because as far as I'm concerned, the idea that an independent Scotland, as a member of the EU, which I'm sure it could become, although again the details would be complicated, an independent Scotland would not be allowed in the EU, which says that you must treat students from other EU countries the same as you treat your own, to have a particular regime for one other EU country. Because that's the thing about this independence thing, that once it happens, if it does happen, then we are a different country from the one to our south. For all that we're told that so many things might not change or will not change, it will be another country. And that brings me to the other topic that I'm going to lead on in this little bit, which is the question of currency, which has become a major one, particularly since the TV debate the other week. And we're told it's our pound, and this is my pound. This pound coin and the value that it represents is mine at the moment, and I'll swap it for something else. And although I don't have one on me, if I had a euro coin, it would be my euro, and if I had a dollar bill, it would be my dollar. And that, to begin with at least, would not alter whatever arrangement an independent Scotland was to come to. The actual value contained in the money that we have in coins and banks and wherever else would be essentially unchanged. But the pound sterling, the system, is the currency of the United Kingdom, and it will remain the currency of the United Kingdom. And they have shown, we have shown, because for now at least we're still part of it, they have shown an extreme reluctance to share that currency with anybody else. And I think that's an absolutely right and proper thing to do. I think that is one of the marks of an independent country, is you have your own money and you have control over how your money works. Because the question isn't what happens to this pound coin. The question is very much more who gets to make new ones and who gets to decide how many new ones are made. And that decision rests with the Bank of England, which is effectively the Bank of Britain, despite the name, answerable to the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Government of the United Kingdom. So I'll finish up with this thought. Yes, we can carry on using pounds, no problem. We could use yen, we could use dollars, we could use all manner of things. But do you think that the Secretary of the Treasury in the US, when he wants to do something economic, phones up Ecuador, which uses the US dollar, and says, do you approve? No, he doesn't. So I'll just finish on the question that's been asked before. Where's the plan B? Thank you.
I'm going to invite Alec Neil to speak on behalf of the Yes campaign.
Okay, I actually think I'm going to go out here because I think you could probably hear better if I come out here than a wee bit far distance there. Can I first of all say and spell out actually what we're voting for on the 18th of September? We're voting to transfer all the powers that Westminster still has over Scotland from Westminster to the Scottish Parliament. And those are considerable powers. The powers over taxation, over the size of the budget, over the power to borrow, the power to represent ourselves in Europe and NATO and the United Nations and many other countries. And many of the most powerful powers are actually still residing in Westminster. And therefore, we are still in Scotland, despite having a devolved Parliament, have to work at the behest and almost with the permission of Westminster. With independence, transferring those powers to the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish people become sovereign over their own affairs like every other country in Europe. Let me say what we are not voting for is a political party. This is not a vote for the Labour Party, or the SNP, the Tories, or the Liberal Democrats. It's not a vote for or against Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon, Alec Neil, Joanne Lamont, or anyone else. This is a referendum on the future of Scotland and our relationship with the rest of the United Kingdom and indeed the rest of the world. And as of today, we do have a partnership with the rest of the United Kingdom. The referendum is not about severing the partnership. It's about redefining the partnership between Scotland and the rest of the UK, so that we are no longer a subservient province, but an equal partner with an equal voice, both in British matters and in European matters. So why should we vote for independence? What are the gains to be had? I think there are three major benefits which we cannot get as long as we remain part of the United Kingdom. Benefit number one is that we will always get the government the Scottish people vote for, and not an alien government imposed on us by other parts of the United Kingdom. I am 62 years of age. I know that's difficult to believe, but for 2/3 of my adult life, Scotland has voted Labour but been ruled by the Tories because England voted Tory. If we vote for a political party in Scotland, that party or a combination of parties will be the government of Scotland. So the first major benefit is that you get the government the Scottish people vote for. And had that been the case in recent years, an obvious example of the difference it would have made would have been the bedroom tax. We would not have had the bedroom tax. We would not have had the poll tax had we been independent instead of having Margaret Thatcher. That's the first big benefit of independence. The second one is this. Scotland is a massively wealthy country. Were we independent today, in terms of wealth per head, we would be the 14th richest nation on earth. The UK is the 18th richest nation. And it's not just because we're blessed with oil, although we have 60% of the oil reserves of the entire continent of Europe. We have 30% of the gas reserves. We have 25% of the tidal and wave power of the continent of Europe. We are a massively rich country. We have 5 universities which are in the top 200 universities in the world. Indeed, per head of population, we have more universities in the top 200 than any other country in the world. But the problem we have in Scotland is that our wealth isn't being spent on the people of Scotland. Because side by side with that massive wealth, we have huge concentrations of poverty and deprivation. 150,000 Scottish children are living in poverty. And if we stay in the United Kingdom, and George Osborne and Ed Balls implement the £25 billion of additional cuts they're promising after the next UK election, not only will there be 150,000 children living in poverty, but 250,000 children will be living in poverty. That is the price of a no vote. If you look at pensioner poverty, if you look at poverty amongst people in work because of low wages, 15% of the people in work in Scotland are living in poverty. The minimum wage has not kept pace with the rate of inflation, and therefore their standard of living has fallen in recent years. We can change all that if we have control over the purse strings, over our own future, over our own destiny. This is not about running the saltire higher up the flag at Edinburgh Castle. This is about the bread and butter issues that matter to everybody in our country. With the powers of independence, we can make Scotland a wealthier country, a fairer country, and a more democratic country. If we vote no, we'll never be taken seriously again. We won't get any additional powers. All we will get is cuts, austerity, and more misery and policies we don't support from London. So I say to you, take this unique opportunity, seize it with every chance we can, and vote yes for the future of Scotland.
I'm going to invite Professor Adam Thomkins to speak.
Thank you very much. There's a really big gulf between where we're sitting and where you're sitting, so if you don't mind me coming this close, I thought I would just use my 7 minutes to respond to some of the points that the Cabinet Secretary just made. One of the first things he said was that Scotland currently works at the behest of Westminster. I mean, this is... I just want to challenge some of the assumptions that underpin what the Cabinet Secretary has said. Westminster is not a foreign country. England is not a foreign country. Right? Westminster is one of the 2 parliaments that serve Scotland's national interest, and the other is the parliament of which the Cabinet Secretary is an esteemed and distinguished member of the Scottish Parliament in Holyrood. But everything that is said by the Cabinet Secretary is said as if Westminster is somehow not just different from us, not just 400 miles away from us, but alien to us and acts contrary to our interests. And this is not the case. It was I thought we were going to have some discussion. There'll be plenty of time. Well, I don't think it is rubbish. Sir, who set up the Scottish Parliament? Who set up the Scottish Parliament? The Scottish Parliament was set up by Westminster. Why was the Scottish Parliament set up by Westminster? The Scottish Parliament was set up by Westminster because it's what Scots wanted. There was a demand in Scotland for Home Rule. I would have supported it. I didn't have a vote. in it because I didn't live in Scotland in those days, but I would have supported it. I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary supported it. I'm sure Robin supported it. We probably would all support it. I mean, there's a demand for home rule in Scotland, and it was delivered. It was delivered not because Westminster wanted it so, but because Scotland wanted it. So there's a nice example, it seems to me, of Westminster acting in Scotland's interest. But look, you'll have time to ask questions after the end of the speeches. The Cabinet Secretary described Scotland, I think I've got this right, as a subservient province. We're not a subservient province. We are a nation. Scotland is a nation within a union of nations in the same way that England is a nation within a union of nations, in the same way, to my mind, that Wales is a nation within the union of nations. And a no vote is a vote that says this is what we want to be. We want to be a nation in a union of nations that recognises us, gives us our own law, gives us our own parliament, gives us our own government, of which the Cabinet Secretary is a distinguished member, gives us our own universities. The Cabinet Secretary is absolutely right to say that Scotland's universities, even the one that employs me, are among the world's best universities. That's one of the reasons why I'm still in Scotland, because I work in such a wonderful Scottish institution. Scotland, in terms of its universities, is a part of the United Kingdom that is already thriving. We don't need independence in order to have successful universities. We have successful universities now. The argument, and this is absolutely key to the SNP's argument for a yes vote, and we heard the Cabinet Secretary make it, the argument that Scotland will always get the government that it votes for if we vote yes. Well, I'm sorry, Cabinet Secretary, but I have never voted SNP, and I never will. But no surprise there. But I still have to live as a citizen under an SNP government. I don't get the government I voted for. Manchester doesn't get the government that it votes for. But should Manchester become independent? What if Glasgow? What if Fife doesn't vote for the government that the rest of Scotland votes for? Should Fife become independent? What about Orkney or Shetland? And if so, should they take the oil with them? Would it be their oil too? Would it be their pound too? I mean, this is a really strange argument. It does as if the only political community of which we can be part is Scotland. And I can be part of a political community called Scotland. I can also be part of a political community called Britain. I can also be part of a political community called the European Union. And these identities do not rub up against each other. They live side by side. There is no contrast between being Scottish and British. We can be both Scottish and British all at the same time. We can live under a jurisdiction that protects us in London and a jurisdiction that protects us in Edinburgh. And the thing that I don't like about the referendum is that it forces us to choose between these identities. I don't want to have to choose between these identities. I want both. And I think that's what the Better Together campaign mean when they say that Scotland has the best of both worlds. It's much better to be living in Scotland than it is to be living in England, because we have double the representation. Actually, we have triple the representation. It's not that we are a subservient province of the United Kingdom. We are the dominant nation in all sorts of ways of the United Kingdom. There is one MP or MSP. There is one MP or MSP for every 28,000 people who live in Scotland. 28,000. But there is one MP in England for every 99,000 people who live there. We have 3 times the representation in Scotland that the English have. The final point that I just wanted to address in my remaining minute and a half, or however long it is the point that the Cabinet Secretary made about poverty. Now look, I find it hard to understand, and it might be that Robin will be able to help us, because I've heard him speak before, and he speaks brilliantly and beautifully about poverty and about inequality. But I don't understand why independence is the answer to the problem of poverty. I fully agree that there is a problem of poverty and inequality in Scotland. In the city where I live in Glasgow, in the city where I live, there is the worst health inequality that we have anywhere in Europe. You can move 6 miles from the wealthiest area of Glasgow to one of the poorest areas in Glasgow and take 15 years off your life expectancy. That is appalling. That is an appalling state of being. I wouldn't support that for a minute, but I don't know, I've never heard the argument made as to how a yes vote would cure that health inequality. Health has been fully devolved to the Scottish Parliament since 1999. This is a devolved responsibility. Health inequality in Scotland is not Westminster's fault, it's not the Tories' fault, it's not the fault of the English, it's our problem, it's Scotland's problem. We already have the powers to deal with it, I'm not sure that we are. In Edinburgh, 24.7% of school children are privately educated. In St Andrews University, not too far away from here, 40% of their undergraduates went to private education. This is the kind of institutionalisation of wealth and privilege here in Scotland. It's not Westminster's fault, it's not the Tories' fault, it's not the English fault, it's our problem, and we already have the resources to deal with it. So the question that I have for you, if you are considering voting yes for the reasons articulated by the Cabinet Secretary, is what is the connection between the problems that he quite rightly identified as being serious public policy concerns for all of us in Scotland? What is the connection between the diagnosis of the problem and the solution? A yes vote. Thank you very much.
Last but not least, we have Robin McAlpine.
Right, listen, I've not been home for 2 days because I was up in Inverness talking, I've been away. I think I'm starting to smell. I'll just stay over here if it's all the same with you. And just one thing to correct is that we're absolutely, Commonweal is absolutely non-party political. I've talked to lots of SNP groups, I've also talked to Labour groups, Labour MSPs, a lot of Green groups, but above all, we do an awful lot of talking to town halls and grassroots people who are not involved in politics. Because one of the things that I think has been absolutely fabulous about this campaign is that politics has been taken back out of the hands of politicians and has been put back in town halls where people can come like this and talk about something that's right. I don't think we're choosing between two identities. I think we're choosing between two futures. We've got a future that we know which is going to come. And that future's fairly straightforward because it looks a hell of a lot like the past, but just a bit worse. We're going to have more austerity, we're going to have more cuts, we're going to have Prime Minister Boris and his Deputy Nigel. We're going to have another period in which we have assaults and attacks outside of the border on the universal public services, the NHS, the stuff that matters to us. And sometimes people kind of say, well, this is like some kind of law of gravity. This stuff just happens. You know, there's no other way that we can go with this. But there is. We can choose a difference. Now, there's no way that I can go in any depth in a few minutes that I've got about why we've got these two differences. I hope it'll maybe come out a little bit. But I'm going to give you one fundamental reason. It's because we're the second lowest wage economy among all the advanced economies in the world. If you look at the breakdown of the Scottish labour market, of where our wages go, only 1 in 5 working Scots earns between £25,000 and £35,000. 2/3 of them earn less than 25. Half of them earn less than £21,000. If you earn £14,000 in Scotland today, you're still earning more than 30% of the working population, and the average pay of the bottom 10% of those in work in Scotland is £6,000 a year. Now, it's not directly comparable because there's all sorts of differences, but to give you an idea about what our neighbours are like, in Norway, their average wage is £45,000 a year. And the average wage of the poorest 10% of people in Norway is £25,000 a year. So just square that in your head. Their poorest 10% earn as much as the average of all our working people. And why is this? This is fairly straightforward. Since about 1979, Britain has plunged into an endless me-first politics. A me-first politics which says the only way that we get anything good in society is if we let the big guy win. If we let the big guy win, because the big guy must be the best, right? If we let the big guy win and then we let them win again and over again, and we keep doing that, eventually all the big guys will be at the top, and that'll be good for us all because they're the best. Now, that sounds, or it has sounded sometimes in British politics like it makes sense, but it's not. It's a charter for bullies. It's an invitation to cartels and manipulation. It's what gave us banks, which bankrupts small businesses because there's more assets in the business for the bank to grab than there is payback. So they put businesses out of business to get the money off them. It's an economy which sees 7 of the 10 richest people who made their money from property development. Now, stop for a second and ask yourself, where does that money come from? If you control the land in which houses are built, and you push the value of houses up and up, who pays that price? It's people that live in houses. So that comes from you. If you open another big retail estate just outside of town, and that closes down the high street of your town, where does that take its money from? It comes from you. It's your pockets. Again and again in Britain, what we've seen is a shift in the way that we run the economy so that the big players capture and control the economy and make themselves richer and richer. Now, this is not the only way that we can do it. If you look at close neighbours, in fact, if you look right across Europe, you will find there's only 2 countries in the developed world who saw a drop in industrial production. That's making things that you can sell. The 2 that saw a drop in industrial production, one was France, which was a 4% drop, and the other was Britain, a 35% drop. All the rest of the developed countries saw increases in industrial production of between 18% and 120%. Why does this matter? Because there's no skill in buying a house and waiting till the value goes up and selling it again. And there's no skill in taking a t-shirt out of a box for China, putting it on a coat hanger, hanging it on a shelf and marking the price up 3 times and taking the money for you. And there's no skill in being a bank that phones you up and says, hello, would you like a service review? We'll give you another loan if you want one. Would you really want it? Oh, you can't afford it now. That's unfortunate, but we've made the money. This is a skill-free economy. These things do not require skill, and that's really important because it's skill that makes people wealthier. Because you pay wages for skill, and you don't pay wages for low skill. If you look at what happens in these economies that are doing it better than us, the reason that they're doing it better than us is because they protect their people from predatory big corporations, or at least they balance it more. They encourage local economies, medium-sized industries, productivity. Britain is 16 percentage points behind the average productivity of an advanced nation. We don't make things. We are not good at creating the wealth that makes people rich, because in the end, growing GDP makes owners wealthy. There's only one thing that ever makes the people wealthier, and it's growing wages. And if there's one thing that Britain never gives you, it's rising wages. In the last 20 years, the GDP of this country has risen substantially, but in real terms, the average salary has barely risen at all. Now that is the second option that we've got to pick and create a country which has an economy which spreads wealth. Not through tax. Not by taxing a bad economy and giving payments to the poor and then making them feel bad about it. By redistributing the wealth of our country by having an economy that's fit for our people. An economy that creates jobs that your children would be proud to have. Because God knows if you look outside that door today, I saw them on the way in, there's a bunch of kids there and they ain't got jobs to go to. Can we do it? Yes. We can do it because we have everything that we need to do it. I've heard some talk from, absolutely, I don't say this about the people who are debating tonight. I've heard other people in this campaign who've sort of implied that maybe Scotland doesn't have what it takes. Dear God, we've got it in spade loads. We have got the resources and the people and the skills. We've got the geostrategic position. We've got the history. We've got the infrastructure. We've got the education system. We've got everything. Norway looks quite puny compared to us if you go through the natural resources and the skills of the people. They don't have one university in the top 200 in the world. They don't have an export industry like whiskey. They don't have anything like the productive land that we have, and they don't have the engineering track record that Scotland has. I heard possibly the most impressive comment that I've heard in this independence campaign from a man in the telly. The BBC was going around and asking them dumb questions that journalists ask. If Scotland was a car, what kind of car would it be? This working class guy whipped round and he gave the best answer to anything I've heard so far. He just looked up and he said, a half-finished Lamborghini. That's Scotland. A place that could be a world leader. A place that could do anything it wants, and we haven't finished it. And what do we need? We need the power. And what gives you power? Independence gives you power. You vote yes, your voice instantly becomes 12 times louder. That's what independence does for you. It gives you the chance to let your voice decide what happens to Scotland and not have it drowned out in a Britain which doesn't give a damn about what its people really think because it runs it for the bankers. There are 2 futures. One that's the same and one that changes. I fancy Scotland's odds.
I did tell you that you would hear passion tonight, and I'm sure you'll agree that we have heard passion, and that's been good. We're going to turn to your questions, and the first question I have is from Mr. Steve McClellan, and it goes like this. George Osborne has plans for bigger spending cuts in the next 5 years than in the last 5 years. Labour and the Lib Dems have essentially backed these. If Scotland votes no, how do we stop the cuts? And I'm going to turn to the no side first and allow Adam to answer that question.
Yeah, is this on? Yeah. So the question was, if Scotland votes no, how do we avoid the cuts? It seems to me that if Scotland votes yes, or if Scotland votes no, there will be a prolonged period of austerity. There is at the moment a fiscal deficit in Scotland. This has been admitted by Alec Neil's government. This is not no campaign talk, because on the same day that Danny Alexander published his famous £1,400 figure, the Scottish government published a paper in which they said, there's a fiscal deficit in Scotland, and there are three ways in which that fiscal deficit could be closed upon independence. Either you could put taxes up, or you could cut spending, or you could do what the Scottish government said they want to do, which is to solve that problem by boosting the size of the workforce in Scotland by having a very ambitious inward immigration target. The problem with that solution, however, is twofold. The first is that it's never been made clear where this migrant workforce is going to come from. Independent estimates have said that it would be ambitious to have a migration target of even half what the Scottish government have said they want to have. And the second problem with that is that it will have really quite significant and serious consequences for what will happen to the border between Scotland and England. Now, the SNP government have quite rightly in my view, said, I'll give them credit where it's due, that they would want an independent Scotland to remain in the common travel area with the United Kingdom and Ireland. But being in the common travel area with the United Kingdom and Ireland requires all the members of that common travel area to have a broadly similar immigration policy. So if the fiscal deficit in an independent Scotland is going to be closed and dealt with in the manner that the Scottish government have themselves voluntarily said would be dealt with, then there will be serious consequences for the border. Why would that matter? It would matter because it would very significantly jeopardise Scottish jobs and trade. The core of the case for the Union is now in the 21st century exactly the same as it was in the 18th century when the Union was created. It's about English security and Scottish jobs and trade. If you close the border, then you jeopardise Scottish jobs. If you close the border, you jeopardise Scottish trade, and that will be bad for the Scottish economy and not good for the Scottish economy. So the problem with austerity is not if we vote no. The problem with austerity is if we vote yes.
Alec, how do we stop the cuts? If Scotland votes no.
Can I first of all say I think Adam didn't answer the question. The question was, if we vote no, what can we do to dodge the cuts? The answer is nothing. Because if you're part of the United Kingdom, as we have been for the last 300 years, including the last 4 years when we've seen draconian cuts take place, no matter how much we lobby and protest, if you don't have the power to do something differently, then you have to accept it whether you like it or not. And don't forget, these cuts are going to be massive. 60% of the cuts that have already been announced have still to be implemented, and on top of that, they're going to cut another £25 billion from the UK budget. Scotland's share of that will be about £2.5 billion. And the reason they're cutting it is because of the agenda to satisfy the southeast of England, which is to shrink the state by privatising essential services like the health service and education. That is where these cuts are going to bite. They're going to end up in more privatisation of health, education and many other services. Now the question is, what difference would it make if you voted yes? And the answer is a huge difference. Because as John Swinney has pointed out, if we get a yes vote, and we get control over all our taxation, all our spending and all our borrowing, our strategy is to expand the Scottish economy and to go for economic growth and jobs instead of austerity and cuts. And we'll do that by investing in new housing, investing in schools and hospitals, investing in new jobs and industry. we have the money to do that. Over the last 5 years, we have contributed £8 billion more than our fair share of revenue into London. And if you project ahead, as Sir Donald Mackay made clear yesterday, Scotland will have the resources to invest for the future. That takes people off the dole queue and into work. It costs £10,000 a year to keep people unemployed. If we invest to get people off the brew and into work, that's how you solve the deficit, not by making more people unemployed. But not only that, we'll also make substantial savings. For example, we've identified up to £600 million a year of wasteful spending that's imposed in Scotland that we have to part finance. For example, over the next 20 years, we are going to be expected to contribute £13 billion to build the successor to Trident on the Clyde. That £13 billion would be better spent on jobs and housing and schools and hospitals in Scotland than investing it in a successor to Trident. That's the difference between yes and no. If you vote no, cuts, austerity, more poverty, more unemployment. If you vote yes, investment, jobs, reducing the deficit, and getting rid of Trident off the Clyde.
Mr McClellan, I don't know where you are. Maybe you could just make yourself known to us. Do you feel your question's been answered? Good to go on.
Hello? I think I got an answer the second time. I got an answer the second time. I think there's been a lot of talk about uncertainty in this referendum campaign, and what scares me is the certainty of what happens if there's a no vote. And I think Alec Neil spelled that out.
We're going to move on to a question from Gary Stewart, and the question is, what makes better together think that Scotland will be safer militarily standing on its own when you consider the situation since the Westminster cuts? Numerous army units and regiments have disappeared, 2 major air bases and the aircraft and squadrons disbanded. So what makes better together think that Scotland will be safer? And we'll go to Robin first of all.
I'm going to answer the question a completely different way. Just for fun, if you haven't heard this story, I'll tell you again. Earlier this year, a Russian frigate entered Scottish waters. And the way that the Ministry of Defence discovered this was because somebody tweeted it. Now, I know you think I'm making that up, but that's true. So once the tweet made its way to the MOD, just seen a frigate in Scotland's waters, they dispatched a frigate to intercept it. It took 36 hours to get there, and the ship was obviously gone. The Russians were at it. They weren't invading it, it was just a mistake. There is no constant sea-bound presence around Scotland's waters. We do not face any credible territorial threat from any nation state or any actor around the world. We should take some more proper sense about how we're looking after our territorial waters, but the main issue that we're really looking for here is more like smuggling and these sorts of problems. The problem that we've really got is that Britain is actually, geostrategically, one of the safest places on the planet. Where we are is incredibly safe, and most of the risks and threats that we have faced are really results of things that we've done. And what I look forward to more than anything else after a yes vote is to change what we are. Britain, when it comes to the military, isn't really so much a modern nation state as the remnants of a collapsing empire. Its military stance is an offensive stance. It's all of our military is designed to invade people and bomb people. It's very poorly designed to defend our territory, and you could argue that's because we don't have any territorial threat. What I think we should be doing in Scotland is saying we don't want to be a power projection nation. We've got no desire to invade other countries or express our power overseas. And so we could take the territorial defence of our country much more seriously. But I want to open up this idea of national security, and I want to say that the real challenge is to start to address human security. We did a report on this, and if you look at the real threats to the way of life of people in this country, almost none of them are military. And a hell of a lot of them are to do with the massive problems of climate change, energy insecurity, food insecurity, all sorts of risks to do with international communications, cyber terrorism, and certainly Trident doesn't help with these, but neither does another aircraft carrier. What I think we could do is stop pretending that we're some sort of global power. Britain isn't that kind of global power anymore, and it's sad that it pretends it is. Why don't we accept what we are, which is a part of a global community of nations who work together when there's international things that need to be done through the United Nations, or for those that believe it, I don't, through NATO. And that's what our role should be equipped to be part of coalitions if things need to be done, civil wars in Africa, whatever we might want to intervene in, and the rest of our efforts should be used to making our people genuinely secure by ensuring that we've got energy security because we have a proper renewable system, food security because we start to use all of that unproductive land that we've got to produce a hell of a lot more of our own food internally, and that we play a major part using Scotland's incredible computer science skills in the global fight against cyber terrorism. These are the things that Scotland should be doing. We're never going to get away with it in Britain because they are so obsessed with their virility symbols and their desire to keep their place at the top table of the UN Security Council, where they can just do whatever America tells them and then think that they're a great world power. I find it sad. Let's be a modern and exciting nation that starts to play a part in the world which isn't based on kidding on that our appendages are bigger than they really are.
I'm speechless, so I'm going to give Dave the opportunity to answer that.
I read recently about a British destroyer off Somalia combating smugglers. I read even more recently about the RAF doing what they can to help these poor souls in northern Iraq. And I'm quite proud of that. And I find it hard to believe that separating ourselves from the rest of the UK, we will still be able to contribute to things like that in any meaningful sort of way. And okay, there are mistakes made, that governments make mistakes, all governments make mistakes, and the government of an independent Scotland, if it comes to pass, will make mistakes. It will not get everything automatically right, which is one of the things you're being encouraged to believe. But you take it or leave it. Basically, it's a judgment you have to make. Are you like me? Are you quite proud of what Britain has done and can still do? Which it can do. No, you don't need to answer me here and now. Just answer it for yourselves by the 18th of September. Are you proud of what Britain can do and has done and can continue to do, which comes in no small part from having a critical mass and the ability to have a military of the size that we do? Because if you reduce it by a factor of 10, you don't end up with a 10th of an aircraft carrier. You end up with something that's qualitatively different. It has to serve a different function. And if you're happy that your military just restricts itself to fishery protection vessels and things that never leave any great distance from Scotland, then yes, perhaps you should be voting yes. If like me, you don't believe in that, then perhaps you should be voting no.
Gary Stewart was the author of the question. I'm going to ask him how he feels about the responses.
With the point you just made, Dave, about Scotland's security, why should the people of Scotland send her sons and daughters to war, basically on the whim of the President of America, which pretty much seems as what it is? And don't tell me I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm ex-military. Why should we send our sons and daughters on America's whim to be killed on foreign soils when they could sign up for the Scottish military and defend Scottish people on Scottish soil. Okay, fair point to send them out to do the humanitarian aid. Absolutely no problem with that. But I don't see why we should send our sons and daughters to die for an American. In wars, that quite frankly, if we look at Tony Blair, he's absolutely hiding now. Because we all know that the first Gulf War was illegal. Weapons of mass destruction did not exist.
I'm going to pull us back because we're actually taking questions on the referendum, and I don't want us to get terribly sidetracked because we're going to lose time. The next question is, if there is a yes vote, will the SNP continue with their police state mentality with armed police attending future political meetings, i.e. recent attendance at supermarket in Inverness? If there is a yes vote, will the SNP continue with a police state mentality with armed police attending future political meetings? I'm going to turn to Alex first of all.
Can I just first of all say, in Scotland today there are 17,330, I think the figure is, police. Of that 17,300 odd, something like 260 are licensed to carry firearms. So that's a very, very small proportion of the total police force. But we recognise that with the photographs that appeared recently, there is some genuine public concern that the police will be carrying firearms, even the small numbers, in normal circumstances. That is why last week Kenny McCaskill and the First Minister made it absolutely clear two things. We will not sanction or allow Police Scotland, as a matter of operational routine, to carry firearms as happens in other countries. We will limit the number of police with the licence to carry firearms to an absolute maximum of 2% of the entire police force. And if there is any case for changing that before it can be changed, it would come to the Police Committee of the Scottish Parliament to be democratically consulted upon and decided. I myself, the First Minister and Kenny McCaskill see no circumstances in which that will be necessary. So to describe Scotland as a police state is a gross nonsense, quite frankly, and particularly as we've made it absolutely clear that 98%, at least 98% of our police officers will not be licensed to carry firearms in any circumstances whatsoever.
I'm going to give Robin the opportunity to answer that question as well.
Well, I mean, I'm really... I was going to say that.
I'm getting the names mixed up. I'm looking at Adam and allowing Robin, but I'm looking at Adam now. Sorry.
Well, I've been confused with many people in my life, but I've never been confused with Robin McAlpine before.
It's the glasses.
I'll take mine off. I have to say I agree with the Cabinet Secretary. I don't think this is a question about independence or not. I agree with, I think, everything that Alec Neil just said. I would add just two observations, which are not meant to be party political or digs at all, but just sort of party neutral observations about this. I have to say, as a citizen, I found it very disappointing indeed that decisions about whether to arm Scotland's police force or not had been made without there being a full and open debate about that in advance in the Scottish Parliament. And I think this is a problem for Scotland under the current regime. We have a Parliament which is elected on a basis which is expressly designed not to deliver one party or majority rule. And we have majority rule at the moment. It's not the SNP's fault that they've been so successful. Congratulations to the SNP on their extraordinary success. It's our fault collectively because that's the nature of the electoral results in 2011. But it isn't working, is it? We have at the moment a Scottish Parliament that doesn't work well in terms of holding the government effectively to account, and the lack of prior, I know there's been a debate in the last week or so, but the lack of prior debate in the Scottish Parliament about what is a very important, sensitive and difficult issue, I think is a bit of a black mark on Scotland's democracy. The second point I want to make is not about the accountability of Mr McCaskill to the Scottish Parliament, but the accountability of the police to the government. And of course we have now just the one police force in Scotland, and the Chief Constable of that police force is directly accountable to the First Minister. And the contrast between that centralisation within Scotland and the decentralisation we've seen south of the border with directly elected police and crime commissioners across England and Wales could not be starker, could it? And one of the things I think is so interesting about the SNP, and I'm sorry, Alec, but so disappointing about the SNP, is that while you quite rightly talk all the time about what you perceive to be in Scotland's national interest in comparison with Westminster and those cousins and friends of ours south of the border, you are really lousy at talking about what is in local interests within Scotland. You are the great centralisers of Scottish politics. So those are the two points I would make in relation to the arming of the police.
Mr. Naismith, maybe you could just, are you happy with the answer? Do you want to comment?
Yes and no. I'm undecided with regards to the question this evening, but having listened to Alex's explanation, this has been going on for months, if not years. The police force, it quietly came in. It was discovered in an incident in Inverness, and now we're coming back saying it's never going to happen again, but it crept in right under your nose. And there's no, once that happens, we condemn Cllr in America and kids getting killed left, right and centre, all because of some crazy person. All it needs is one crazy policeman that gets upset by something that says to him, and he opens fire with a gun. You know, it's just, how we got to that stage, I just don't know.
Alec, do you want to respond?
Can I just say, I understand the public worry because the policemen appeared not to be in any situation where firearms were required. And I think that became obvious because they were actually carrying the new style of holster and people actually saw the guns. And it's been happening for years, but they carried inside. The important point is that the number of police licensed by the police authority to carry guns is less than 1.5% at the moment. You've said it would be an absolute maximum of 2%. So at any one time, for obvious reasons, I can't give you the exact number because we don't disclose that publicly in any one shift. But the maximum number of police who've actually got the licence, as I said, is about 260 odd out of 17,300 odd policemen. And that's the important point, that never, you see it was creeping in. I think what happened was nothing creeped in. We knew exactly how many police were licensed. But also these people are highly trained. They are not permitted to use these guns except in very, very exceptional circumstances. And that policy has never been changed and it's never been breached.
We'll move on to our next question, and it's fairly brief, and maybe we'll get the answers that are fairly brief as well. Is independence from the UK the first step to removing the Queen? And I will go to you, Robin, this time.
I mean, my day started, well, actually my day started in a travel lodge around about Perth. This is the way this campaign's been going. But straight after that, my day started at the launch of Elliot Bulmer, who's one of Scotland's leading constitutional experts, book about the process of a written constitution for Scotland. Now, this book is, I highly recommend it if you have any interest in it. It's quite readable for a book on the constitution. And it's really a question about what can you do with constitutions and what did he say about your country. And what he really says is that we can have a constitution that says how does our country work, which strikes a balance between reflecting what people really want for their constitution, for their country, values that we want to enshrine in it, without it becoming some terrible prescriptive document that says this has got to be how everything is. What I think is the most interesting thing about the book and about what he says in it, he says, actually, the final words of a constitution are much less important than the process through which we create it. And it's the process of going out to the people of Scotland and saying, this is not a country that we are designing for you. And when I say we, I don't mean me, I mean powerful people. This is not a country which is being designed for you. This is your country. The people are sovereign. You design the country that you want. And that whatever comes out of that, whatever that process creates, has brought you in. The phrase, I can't do the Latin, but there's a great Latin phrase for this, but it sounds way better in English anyway. Nothing about us without us. If it's about us, it's with us. If it changes our lives, it's us that make those decisions. Now, this idea that the process of producing a written constitution for Scotland is more important than whatever comes out of it, other than some of the technical things that we've got to get right, I think is a wonderful idea. And one of the things which I don't think has been properly discussed is the fact that we don't need to have a referendum on whether there's going to be a monarchy or not if we have a participative process of writing a constitution. And if we have that process, the people of Scotland, in a discussion, not shouting, not throwing things, not grandstanding, but in discussion, will start to talk about what they want for their country. Now, I do not believe that we should be, in this day and age, in a country which has got a head of state who genetically inherited it. I think it's actually abhorrent, and I don't think it's doing it. But I'm not somebody who wants to go crashing in on what people think before they talk. So I would campaign in a process of writing a referendum to say we should have a democratically elected head of state. But what I think we're really looking at is a choice. We're going to have either a monarch who becomes really just a ceremonial figurehead, or we're going to have a democratically elected head of state. What I cannot imagine the people of Scotland are going to say is that we want to continue to have a queen who's allowed to veto legislation, which is what we've got at the moment. So, as far as I'm concerned, this is a choice for all of us to make. I believe strongly that in this day and age, the statement goes out that one among us, by choice, by our choice, becomes the head of our state, and then open all the supermarkets they want. That, as far as I'm concerned, is what we should do. But if the people of Scotland talk and they say, well, you know, certainly for as long as Elizabeth's alive, we wouldn't mind if we kept her on board, completely non-political role, but as a purely ornamental role. I'm not going to cry over that. I'm not going to say, oh, well, that's us failed in our duty. I think it would be someone asked me this once, and I just said, it would just be like walking into somebody's house, a brand new house with chintz wallpaper. You think, what the hell's that doing there? That's from another era. But again, this is for people to choose, and what I think is important is not what we choose, but how we choose. And if we choose together, and if we have the conversation properly, like we're having now, with different people having different views, if we do that, I think whatever we come out with, all of us are better and stronger for it, and we'll be in a country which is about us.
I know this is a field that Adam feels particularly strongly about, so I'm going to let him jump in.
Well, no, I mean, I was described in the introductory remarks as somebody who's a member of Republic. I'm sorry, but I'm not a member of Republic. The republicanism that I was interested in is a very kind of academic thing about 17th century constitutional theory, which I'm not going to talk with you about unless you really want me to, in which case we'll do it privately later and after. But it's kind of the study of the political work of John Milton and all of these kinds of people. Elliot Bulmer, who Robin cites, was briefly a PhD student of mine, so I'm quite familiar with his work, and I'm very proud of the way in which he's managed to produce his book. I think it's tremendous. I haven't read it yet, but I look forward very much to doing so. I think that what matters much more than who the head of state is what powers the head of state has. I think the most important thing that Robin said, or the thing that chimed anyway most importantly with me, is that if we have to have a head of state at all, it ought to be a head of state that is ceremonial, that plays a dignified role in the Constitution rather than an efficient role in the Constitution. The thing that constitutions are supposed to do, and this is what I was referring to a few moments ago when I talked about the arming of the police and the accountability of the Chief Constable of Police Scotland to the First Minister, the thing that constitutions are supposed to do is to hold power to account. And the first thing you have to do when you're thinking about designing a constitution is who you want to be powerful. And the second thing you have to do is how do you want the powerful to be held to account? And in Scotland, we're not getting all of that right at the moment because, as I said a few moments ago, the Scottish Parliament is not doing a very good job in terms of holding the current Scottish Government effectively to account. When I was a witness at the Scottish Parliament a few weeks ago, for example, I was interrupted by an SNP member of the Scottish Parliament, and the result of that being interrupted was that I was told by the SNP convener of that committee that my evidence had become, quote, contentious, and she cut my microphone off and I was unable to finish giving evidence. Now that is not what happens in a mature democracy. Those who are powerful listen to those who are not and are held to account by those who are not. And that's what matters in a constitution, it seems to me.
The question was asked by Susan Cummin, and Susan, Susan, are you happy with the answer?
Surprisingly, I don't think either side answered my question, although their answers were interesting. But it sounded like, from Robin, a personal view of what he would like to happen. Whether or not that actually would happen, I'm not that confident that a decision would be.
But my answer was just to say, I can't tell you what will happen,
Yeah.
because what has been agreed is that there will be a national consensual process of writing the Constitution, and I can't tell you what people will decide. And that's the point, is that it is not for one person or one party or one group. Fundamentally, I can't tell you how strongly I believe about this. It is not for one party, one person or one group to decide the shape of our future country. It's for us all. Nothing about us without us. So I can tell you what my view is, and I can tell you the process which will make the decision, but it's your decision every bit as much as it's mine.
But would that process actually happen? I mean, would
We've
I
been promised
personally have a say?
it. We've been promised it, and if it doesn't happen, I can tell you that every single sinew of my body will be used to hold them to account, because I can tell you this. I can tell you this. I know a lot of people in the SNP are very genuine about this. If there was any backsliding, it would be war. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of us who have been involved in this campaign because it's participatory and because it's involving and because it's a different way of doing politics. And anybody that thinks we're going to go back to the old way, where they're going to close a door, come out with a document and say, is that okay for you? Yeah, okay, fine, that'll do, we'll go ahead. No, there would be an uproar in Scotland. It's been promised, and I believe that is what will happen.
But if the Scottish Government is going to act in the way that, you know, the people elect your MPs and then the MPs speak for the people that have elected them, well, back to the old thing that not everybody votes for the same party. So,
well, let me very quickly, because I think maybe I've jumped ahead and not explained what happened or how this worked. Let me give you the quick example. It's been done in a few countries, but when I say that we write it, I mean they don't, not at all. And what happened? This happened in Iceland. And what they did was they had a whole wonderful process whereby, for example, they picked 500 names at random out of the phone book, and they got these people together. And then everybody else in the country was asked to form groups and discuss and put ideas together and to send that into those 500 people. And then they looked at this and they worked through this and they produced a big plan which didn't involve politicians at all. And then they had another stage of it whereby they asked people, anybody, to stand, and it wasn't politicians, to stand elected in a manifesto about, just for this, to write that constitution. Politicians weren't involved in it at any stage. It was the people that built it that wrote it through a participatory process. Now, that's what we've been promised in Scotland. Not that we'll be consulted, not that we'll have the right to tweet them or email them, that we write it, that we the people write it, and that we find a process and a means and a manner for doing that. That's what gets me excited. That's what I'm really positive about. I actually don't care that much about constitutions. I'm a big fan of active democracy. I think constitutions are fine, but once you've started them, the real business is day-to-day politics, day-to-day democracy, holding people to account and doing things. What really excites me is, for the first time in my life in Britain, a big decision will be made, not with the consent of the people, but by the people. And that's the thing which I'm very excited about. Participatory government that lets people create the world in which they live. That's what this is all about for me. Letting people create the world in which they live in a way that reflects what they want, in a way that reflects their community and their nation. And if we can do that, if we can have a process which trusts you all once, just once, if you can just once get that chance to be the people that write and shape your nation, I don't think you'll ever accept it being done for you again. I think it will change your minds about how you see the government of a country and what your role in it is. And once that happens, I do not believe you will ever accept a politician looking down to you and saying, I'm sorry, this is how it's going to be. So that's what I mean by the people will write it. They will write it.
Susan have a final response, and then I think it would be a good thing for maybe one or two of the audience to make comment if they wish to do so. If you do, just pop your hand up, and these two fit folks who are running about with microphones will land by your side, and you'll be able to make your comment. Susan first.
Yeah, thank you. I think that whether the people speak and say yes or no, I think that idea that the government should change and listen more to the people, the whole people, would be a good result. And I don't really see why it has to be a yes vote for that to happen.
Can I answer that? In many ways it doesn't. In many ways it doesn't. And I will be absolutely clear. In my view, personally, I think the SNP has been the best of the mainstream parties in the United Kingdom. At kind of being a little bit participatory, that's just quite a low hurdle. You know, to be the best mainstream political party in Britain for listening to the people is not a very high hurdle. And I will tell you straight away that one of the things that we will be involved in, everybody that I know who's interested in this, we'll be involved in yes or no is saying this is an end to bunker government. Government which is done by people in bunkers is not what we can do. It's just that if we get a yes vote, there is an immediate promise for a start of that process. If there's a no vote, we have to start and change our politics. Because our politics in Britain isn't working. Yes or no, our politics in Britain is not working.
Robin, how about we stop talking and
let them Okay.
Who would like to make a comment? It's coming.
That wasn't me. Question for Adam and Dave. You said that both of you have mentioned that the current form of government here, which is meant to discourage majorities, obviously, in your words, hasn't worked, and so we're lumbered with a majority government here. What you didn't mention is the fact that we are constantly lumbered with majority governments in Westminster. So the fact that the government here is a majority, as you said, should be unusual, as the system is designed against that. The Westminster system isn't designed to prevent that. The Westminster system is designed to encourage majority governments. That's not going to change with a no vote. That can only change with a yes vote.
Two very quick responses to that. One is, of course, we don't have majority government in Westminster, we have coalition government in Westminster. All of the polls for the next general election predict that there will be another Parliament in 2015. The second big difference, of course, between the Westminster Parliament and the Scottish Parliament is that there are two houses of the Westminster Parliament, and they each act as a check on the other, and there is no second house in the Scottish Parliament to check the majority rule in Holyrood. Now, Westminster is very far from perfect. I would not hold the Westminster model up as an ideal model, but it is much improved on the way it was 30 years ago, for the reason that we now have in the House of Commons these things called select committees. And select committees work in a way which is very different from the way in which committees in the Scottish Parliament work. Scottish Parliament committees are routinely now dividing 4-3. If they have 7 members, 4 SNP, 3 other, and they're dividing 4-3 on party lines, because it's party that dominates everything that MSPs do, downstairs in the plenary chamber and upstairs in the committee rooms as well. That's not the case in Westminster. In Westminster you have all party groups of MPs who genuinely hold individual secretaries of state to account on non-party bases. And this doesn't make the front page of the tabloid newspapers, but it's what effective parliamentary democracy is all about. And one of the interesting paradoxes in the campaign, we hear a lot about the way in which Westminster needs to learn from Holyrood. And there are things that Westminster could usefully learn from Holyrood. Of course there are. But there are also things that Holyrood could usefully learn from Westminster. None of us should be so arrogant as to think that Holyrood is working perfectly just because it's the nearest parliament to where we happen to live.
I'm going to let Alec come in and then Dave, and then we're going back to the audience.
Can I just say, I don't think the committees of the Parliament since 1999 have worked as well or as effectively as they were intended to. It's nothing to do with the SNP being in the majority. Nothing fundamentally has changed in the last 15 years. And the presiding officer has put forward a number of proposals, for example, that the conveners of the committees should be elected by the members and not nominated by the party leaders. I personally totally support.
It already
that
happens in
kind-
the House of Commons.
Yes, and that I personally support that kind of proposal. I do think that the committees in the Holyrood Parliament should be strengthened, and that feeling is shared by my colleagues in the Cabinet. What I don't think we should have is an unelected House of Lords, where 900 Lords who are either there because a politician put them there or because of an accident of birth can decide the policy of the nation. That is totally undemocratic, and I'm surprised the Professor of Constitutional Theory doesn't attack that.
I look forward to a time when more power comes to the Scottish Parliament, and that is going to happen. And you can poo-poo it all you like, it's a matter of fact that more power is coming, and more power will come beyond that. But I also look forward to a time when more power comes from the Scottish Parliament down to places like Fife. I'm going home this weekend, well, I'm going home tonight, but part of this weekend I will spend looking at the proposals for where houses should be built in Fife in the future. My constituents, the people who voted me in, have told me in no uncertain terms in big public meetings what they don't want, but we're going to get it because the Scottish Government just overrules us right, left and centre.
Can we have a couple of very brief comments from you, because we have quite a few questions still to be answered. You've got a comment to make. That somebody at the back.
Just a comment from Mr. Thomkins right at the start, when he stood up and said about Scotland as a nation, Scotland is a dominant nation within the United Kingdom, and then he went on to ask, should we have independence for Manchester, for Glasgow, for Fife? So which is it? Is Scotland a nation or is Scotland a region? Because you seem a bit confused about which one it is.
I will answer that question. Scotland is a nation, as I already said.
Thank you.
I answered your question. You said, is Scotland a nation or a region? It's not a region, it's a nation. That's a straight answer to a straight question. Manchester's a city.
I'm going to go back.
Sorry? Listen, I'm from Glasgow. I'm very happy to be in Fife this evening, but I am not, as a Glaswegian, going to tell you what Fife is.
It's a kingdom.
There you go.
I'm going to go to a question before we come back to you, and it's nameless, and the question really refers to this side of the House. Why is the Better Together campaign busing in English university students and paying them to canvass in Scotland?
Well, I reckon it's because they don't have enough folk in Scotland who are prepared to get around the doors punting the rubbish that Better Together are punting.
News to me, nobody I've been canvassing in has been a busted English student.
Well, no, they are.
Anybody else?
No, they are.
Do you know anything about this, Adam?
Do we have a serious question?
It's a serious
Do we have a question that has some evidence behind it?
We have evidence. We can show you the photos.
Can you use the mic?
There was a Labour Party MP councillors in West Derbyshire clearly on the Twitter feed were advertising for volunteers. Who wants to help with the No campaign in Scotland? We'll pay your expenses, we'll pay your food, we'll pay your accommodation. Buses will take you to Scotland. That was on their Twitter feed, and it was widely posted through Facebook and other social networking medias, and that was in West Derbyshire, I believe, councillors and MPs.
It sounds to me like a question that should be addressed to the Labour Party, and I would be the last person to speak for the Labour Party, as with the councillor. But look, I have to say, I don't think that there is anything wrong with people south of the border expressing a view about what should happen in this. I don't think there's anything wrong with people, and I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary will agree with this. I don't think there is anything wrong with people from south of the border expressing a view as to how they would like Scots to vote. The decision is ours. The decision is for people who are in Scotland and who are lawfully on the electoral register on the 18th of September. But there is nothing wrong with people from outside of Scotland expressing a view as to how they would like us to vote, because the vote isn't just about Scotland's future, it's about the future of the United Kingdom. Right? If Scots vote yes on the 18th of September, then the United Kingdom will continue as the continuated state, but it will be much diminished. It will lose nearly 9% of its population. It will lose 95%, I think it is, of its oil and gas reserves. It will lose a third of its landmass. Right? Why shouldn't people who live in the rest of the United Kingdom express a view about those issues which affect their future?
Can I say, Adam, there's a big difference between expressing a view, which they're perfectly entitled to do, and busing people into Scotland to try to undermine Scottish democracy. There is a big difference between the two things. Can I say,
stop scaremongering. It's not about undermining.
I'm going to draw a line under this. I'm going to draw a line under this, and I'm going to ask that there be a wee bit more gracious in answering the questions. And I'm going to come back to the audience. And there's a lady there. Can we wait for the mic so that we can hear?
I'm interested in the participatory process that you're talking about if we have independent Scotland. And a lot of polls, etc., are carried out, and a lot of opinion is asked for sought on the internet these days. I would like assurances that it's not going to be restricted to internet access, because that would disenfranchise a large percentage of the population.
I mean, what I want to do to answer that question, because it's something I feel passionate about, very strongly about. I think our politics is broken because I think our politics is closed in itself, and it's excluded more and more and more of the population. It's become more professional, and if you look at where politicians come from now, they almost all come from within politics. But I do genuinely listen really about the referendum. So what I maybe suggest is we had a commission which was chaired by Larry Flanagan, who's the head of the EIS, just to ask this question: how could you make politics more participatory? How can we involve people again? And there's a report from that which is a very easy read. It's on our website, readfoundation.org, in the publications, and it explains a lot about not only how we could implement participatory democracy here, but it looks at some wonderful examples of where it's done. For example, Porto Alegre in Brazil, where 20% of the entire city's budget was decided wholly by its citizens in discussion forums. So I think it would go and have a look at that, because it isn't really directly related to the independence campaign, other than saying that, you know, I think that Scotland is probably more likely to implement that than Westminster. But we could do a lot of it anyway.
Is there another comment or question coming from the audience? In that case, I'm going to move. Oh, we've got one, have we?
What would the speakers suggest we replace the House of Lords with? A Congress like the Liberal Democrats suggested, or have you got other suggestions?
There's a presumption there that there will be a change, and I think perhaps you'd like to rephrase that.
If there's a yes vote, what would we do? Well, can I just answer that? First? Can I just answer that very quickly, which is to say that actually I am not a fan of two chambers, because I think it tends to act as a block and change. If you look at what happens, you have two elected groups which prevent each other from doing things, and I think it's actually small c conservative. I do. Oh, it is. That would be another part of the constitution writing process. But if you ask me what I think we should do, it's not that. I don't think we need one group of rich people in a chamber keeping an eye on another group of pretty rich people in a chamber. What I think we need to do to monitor our democracy is open it up and make it participative. My second chamber would be the people of Scotland.
Adam, do you want to come back on that?
I'm not in favour of there being a second chamber in the Scottish Parliament, because I think the last thing Scotland needs, I'm sorry, Cabinet Secretary, I think the last thing Scotland needs is yet more politicians. I'm in favour of making the Scottish Parliament work well. I'm pleased to hear that the presiding officer has finally accepted the sense of recommendations which have long since been established in the House of Commons that conveners or chairs are elected by members rather than nominated by parties. The Commons have been doing that for ages, and the Scottish Parliament is playing catch-up. In terms of the Westminster Parliament, I'm going to say something even more unpopular than everything I've already said this evening. I would not reform the House of Lords. I think the House of Lords works very well, and the reason for that, I thought that might be unpopular. The reason for that is because it works. Right now, there are two ways. I mean, guffawing at something just because you disagree with it is, you know.
Let's be gracious. We have 4 invited guests here tonight who have given up their time to come, and I think we should treat them with courtesy.
Let me try very briefly, I mean, just one minute, Chair, no more, as to why I think the House of Lords work that. Look, there are 2 ways in which you can derive legitimacy. Input and output. How did you get there, and what do you do, in short? Now, we elect politicians. They therefore have legitimacy because we elect them, irrespective of how good or not very good they are. Right? And that is not how you make the House of Lords legitimate, because it's not elected. Right? It's legitimate because it does an extremely good job. Most of the legislation which is passed by the House of Commons needs to be revised because the House of Commons doesn't work very well as a legislative chamber. The House of Lords does the job of scrutinising that legislation line by line by line and making it better. And to me, what matters is not so much are the lawmakers elected or unelected, but is the law any good? And the law is better because it is made better by people who happen not to be elected. We don't elect our judges, right? But we still recognise that they have the legitimacy and the authority to make decisions which can bind us because they're the right people with the right training for the job. And I would not be in favour of electing judges any more than I would be in favour of electing the second house of the Westminster Parliament.
We're going to have a comment from the gentleman there.
It seems to me that Mr. Thomkins there has just given a wonderful argument in favour of a benevolent dictatorship, because there is no democratic legitimacy in the House of Lords, and that's the beginning and end of the argument. It should be abolished.
Benevolent dictatorship might be quite good if you could guarantee your dictator was always going to be benevolent, whatever that may mean. The one thing you need to do if you're going to have 2 chambers is not have 2 where the second one is just a duplicate of the first, because then you're just paying twice as much for the same thing.
I'm going to take us back to the written questions, and the first one is in 2 parts. If we vote yes, when will we then be forced to change to the euro? And if we vote no, what change will we see in Scotland? And I'm going to go to you, Robin, first.
Okay, right, this is really tricky because the currency question is a big and complex question. The simple answer is that we have a whole range of options for what we do with currency, and I actually don't favour the currency union. And what I think we've struggled with is, because this complex question has only really been discussed in the crucible of a, he said, she said, campaign, we've not really been able to discuss things. So, for example, I'm firmly of the view that sterling zone is facing another serious crisis in the near future. The banks have not reformed. Everything which was all the bad debt which brought the banks down the last time is still there. All we did was we threw money at them to prop it up temporarily. If there is another international economic shock, it is my belief that there will be a run in the banks in Britain again. The size of it I don't know, but it will happen. And what's really scary is that conventional neoclassical economics only has 2 responses to that. One is cut interest rates, but we've cut them to virtually 0, so we can't do that anymore. And another one is to throw money at it, and we've got no money left. So one of the reasons why I don't favour a currency union is I'm not confident about the future of sterling. But we've got 3 options immediately, and they're all the pound. We'll have a currency union, or we'll have sterlingisation, and I'm the first person to say that's using sterling without a formal union. That's not a long-term solution, maybe 5 years, something like that. But what I think would be very useful is it could give us 5 years to see what happens, because I wouldn't completely rule out the euro if they get their act in order. For Scotland, which is an exporting nation, and it's a very high value exporting nation, the euro would almost certainly be undervalued. And what happened if you look in Europe is Greece really suffered because the euro meant they couldn't export because it was way overvalued. But the corollary of that is that Germany had a euro which was way undervalued, and that meant that Germany could export at a very competitive rate for what was a very advanced economy, and Scotland could be in that position. So it's not impossible that euro might be an option as we go forwards. And the third option is a Scottish pound, pegged 1-to-1 for sterling, which is my preferred option, and I think I'd rather go there rather than a transitionary period. I don't believe that the membership criteria of the European Union is going to force the euro upon us. I think we will technically sign up to a process that will have us aligning our economy with the Eurozone, but that's a membership requirement anyway, and I don't think the real politics will ever force the Euro on us. What I really hope is that we can get a grown-up debate about currency, because I'm on one side, I'm not super impressed with how we've handled this on either side. It would be much better if it was possible to have a grown-up discussion about the different options so people could understand. And I do still have worries about a currency union for the reasons I've stated. But what I'm saying is we have three options, all of which are strong options, which are realistic and workable, none of which I think are weaker than where we are, and all of this which will give us a chance to manage our economy in a period of stability while we decide what it is that we want to do next. So I'm pretty relaxed about the different options.
The first part of the question was, will an independent Scotland be required to take the euro? No. An independent Scotland would not be required to take the euro. I've written a book about EU law. I have had the misfortune of studying the Treaty on European Union and the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. I know that quite a lot of what the SNP are saying about EU accession is nonsense, but the one thing about EU accession which the SNP are saying, which is not nonsense, is that they are correct to say that an independent Scotland would not be required to take the euro. So that's the answer to the first question. The second question was what more powers would, what would happen after a no vote, what more powers would Scotland get? What change would we see? Well, all three unionist parties are committed to further empowering the Scottish Parliament. The only major party in Scotland that has not said how they would like to see the Scottish Parliament further empowered in the event of a no vote, of course, is the SNP. And the SNP aren't likely to say that between now and the referendum, because they're campaigning not for more devolution, but for an end to devolution, because there would be no devolution in an independent Scotland, obviously. But after the referendum, if there is a no vote, the SNP will have to pretty quickly, I think, pronounce on what it thinks about the future of the Scottish Parliament. My own view is that the Scottish Parliament needs to become responsible for raising most of the money that it spends. The problem at the moment with the Scottish Parliament, it seems to me, is that it already has really quite a lot of spending power. It's responsible for about 60%, nearly two-thirds of public spending in Scotland. Westminster is responsible only for about 40%. That puts the Scottish Parliament on a par with the Canadian provinces and the Australian states and the German Länder. So in terms of what constitutional theorists would call sub-state legislatures, the Scottish Parliament is already very powerful in terms of what it spends. But it's not very powerful in terms of being responsible to you and me for the difficult decisions that politicians have to make about where that money is coming from. I therefore favour fiscal devolution. I favour the devolution to the Scottish Parliament, for example, of all of income tax. I think the Scottish Parliament should be responsible for setting the bands and rates of income tax for Scottish taxpayers. I'm in favour of looking also at the way in which the Scottish Parliament could, if MSPs wanted to, adjust the welfare legislation, the welfare settlement that is legislated for by the United Kingdom Parliament. So I am in favour of really ambitious fiscal devolution and more modest welfare devolution. I think that those plans, which have been published by, what I've just said is very close to what the Conservative Party position is. It's also very close to what the Liberal Democrat Party position is. Labour are offering much less, and that is, to my money, in whatever currency that money would be, a problem. But as I have said already, I'm not here to answer for the Labour Party. I like what the Conservatives have suggested. I like what the Liberal Democrats have suggested, and I think that a variant of those proposals will be enacted after the next general election, as long as the Labour Party don't win the next general election.
you'll realise that we have some answers, and Mr. Taylor might be. Where is he? Mr. Taylor, do you want to comment? Do you feel your question's been answered?
It was pretty much answered. The yes camp, they're going about how wealthy Scotland will be if they vote yes. And then on the other hand, you say we're going to be borrowing and spend. As a working person, I feel the only way you will get the money is make me worse off as a working class people.
Can I have an answer?
Yes,
briefly. Quick answer to that. The one thing I've not had a chance to talk about tonight is the second half of what I said. If we do that, we're finished. We can't do that. Our only hope for our future is working people becoming more wealthy. If we don't start to create quality jobs, rather than the bargain basement jobs that we have in the UK at the moment, if we do not do that, we will not have the money in people's pockets to pay for public services. Scotland's future is not about taxing the people here to fix the problems. It's about changing the economy. We need an industrial policy. We need an industrial policy which actively creates not just any job, but good jobs. Everybody accepts our economy is unbalanced. Far too much service sector and far too much low pay. If we don't change that, if we don't get out of that model, there isn't a simple or realistic solution. So it is most certainly not that. If we cannot create that economy, then we will fail. But this is the point. All the other countries with the resources and the position that we have, that's what they've got. They've got high pay economies with good jobs. There's no time to explain how to do it. It takes about 15 minutes just to go through some of the suggestions that we can do. But if we intervene to say enough now, we have got to recreate an economy with jobs for young and old people which are productive and high skill and high pay so they get proper wages. If we don't do that, we will never be able to turn everything else around. And the reason above all that I support independence is because I do not think Westminster wants to do that. They're only interested in the City of London and the financiers, and they don't care about skilled labour. Scotland has always cared about skilled labour, and it's been able to get away from that economic model which is rigged for the banks and do something better, which is about what people can build with their skills and with their hands. That, I think, is Scotland's future. Our future is not oil, and it's not any of these other things. It's all about capturing what our people can do and making sure that they get paid properly for that thing that they can do well. If we do that, then our future is solid. I really believe that.
Thank you. You'll realise that our evening is drawing to a close, and I'm going to give Alec a brief opportunity to comment, and then any of the panellists who want to. But in the meanwhile, can I thank you for being a good audience and for actually taking the trouble to come here tonight. But also a big thank you to the panellists who have come. Some have had a bigger battering than others, but that's the nature of the political game. And they'll go home and, that will be sorted out by morning, and there'll be another good time waiting in the corner for them. But I would have to say that Robin would find a future in the Church of Scotland. He's the best preacher I've ever heard.
I would agree with that. Just to add to what Robin said, the last thing we would do is increase the level of taxes on working people. Because what we've got to do in Scotland is get people off welfare and into work. Not by cutting benefits and impoverishing people who can't find work, but by creating work. Let me just give you one example of the kind of thing we can do if we get power over the economy. In the North Sea at the present time, there are 600 oil rigs. Many of those oil rigs are past their useful date, their sell-by date. They need to be decommissioned. There is a whole new industry to be created in the decommissioning of oil rigs from the North Sea. It's worth billions upon billions of pounds. If we have control over economic policy, we can do what the Norwegians have done and make sure that we actually get the benefit, in this case from decommissioning, create many new engineering, high value added jobs in Scotland. Not just to decommission rigs from the North Sea, but we can actually make Scotland an international centre of excellence for decommissioning and create many, many jobs for our people. That's how we get ourselves onto a far different path from the one we've been on. If you vote no, it's more of the same, more cuts, more austerity, more unemployment, more taxation, more deficits. And that's the choice facing everybody. Do you want that kind of future, or do you want a future where we can say to every child in Scotland that if you wish you can stay in Scotland and have a decent future for you and your family without having to leave Scotland to get work?
We're going to get locked in shortly, so to avoid that, a very brief word from the no side.
Okay, I'm just going to touch on, I could touch on many points out of that.
No, you won't.
I'm going to pick on one. Yep, I understand. We get told again and again about this mythical Westminster, this alien creature that lives far away. Westminster, the Parliament, is 650 MPs drawn from the entire UK. They're not all actually elected for people in London. And even if they were, I mean, I'm from Fife, I've lived most of my life in Fife, but I did spend a fair amount of time in the southeast of England when I was younger. And I discovered the people there are not different from us, except they have funny accents. There's not such a huge difference between us and them. There isn't some alien conspiracy that's trying to keep us down. There's a lot of people making mistakes. But the idea that by just voting yes on the 18th of September, mistakes will be eliminated in Scotland and all these wonderful things will happen. Lots and lots of money will be spent without it being very clear where it's supposed to come from. Have a think about that and then make your minds up.
I agree with the First Minister. He said that Scotland is not oppressed and we have no need to be liberated. I agree with the Prime Minister. Scotland could be a successful, independent country. Scotland would not be a successful, independent country on the half-baked plans being put forward by the SNP, who can't even answer basic questions about such issues as what currency we would use. But that's the SNP's fault, not Scotland's fault. Scotland could be a successful, independent country, but I do not understand why we need to take the risk to get there, given that we are already free and not oppressed. Not my words, but the words of the First Minister, with whom I don't always agree, but on this particular occasion, I do. The core of the case for the Union is the same now as it was 300 years ago. English security for Scottish jobs and trade. If you want to put that security, those jobs and that trade at risk, vote yes. If you want to secure that prosperity and to secure those jobs and to keep that trade, vote no.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you please put your hands together for the panel? And could I ask you as quickly as possible to go outside, and I'll invite you to have a pavement meeting outside with any of the panellists that you want to speak to.